Hey there, everybody. Sorry about the delay in getting on. I know it's a few minutes late. Hopefully, you guys are having a good Friday and it's had a good week so far. Um, After our last live event, my laptop decided that it was done and it finally crashed, so I had to get a new one last weekend. And I thought I had my webcam all set up with my new laptop, but apparently there's technical difficulties. So, had to get in on my phone, and hence the delay. But anyway, now that we're all here, let's go ahead and get started with today's training session. We will be talking about flexibility and why it's important for everyone to be flexible. And it's not just for like physical fitness, it has many overall positive effects. It obviously improves mobility, it'll improve posture, muscle coordination, and it also reduces the risks of injury and any muscle soreness, especially after any sort of exertion. Overall, if you get in better shape, the more flexible you are. And we'll get into that as far as how that happens here in just a minute. If you don't practice flexibility, what happens is your muscles actually shorten over time. And so this is why you're more prone to being injured. Just from everyday tasks. Forget trying to exercise. You can actually get injured from obviously trying to lift something and you go to move and your muscles aren't supporting you on that, and then you end up having issues with it. So in this, often people will notice that they have like a stiffness sensation or feeling, and that's what is from the muscle being shortened. And so it can obviously restrict not only exercising, but it also restricts things you can do every day. So there are several things that influence your level of flexibility. One of them is age. Just naturally as our bodies age, they tend to become less flexible. There are ways to combat this. Obviously, your bone size and structure. Some people just have a larger structure, larger bones, and that plays a role in their muscles and tendons' ability to be flexible. Also, it's the makeup of your connective tissue. So, for instance, which is all the different things that connect your muscles and tendons together, is some people have greater elasticity or movement of those connective tissues than others. Women, for example, are typically more flexible than men, and this is due to their connective tissue structure. There's also some thought that estrogen might play a role in that. And then obviously if you have a bulky body, and it doesn't necessarily mean fat, like overweight, but just even like if you've bulked up like you think the bodybuilders, they're not as flexible as someone who doesn't have all that bulk on them. So obviously we touched briefly on the benefits of flexibility. Now we're going to dive a little more in depth on that. You can have more flexibility as far as it, you get fewer injuries because of the strength and the elasticity that your body has means that it's able to withstand more physical stress that it couldn't do if your body wasn't flexible. As far as it also helps get rid of any imbalances. So flexibility greatly influences how well your body's balanced, so that way just walking or when you bend over to pick something up off the floor or anything like that, you're not stretching one side more than the other and causing an imbalance, which can lead to some injury. So this is obviously important and helpful. And overall, you just feel better. You have less pain, that was, as they used to be referred to, aches and pains that you get as you age. You have less of that the more flexible you are because your muscles are more limber. You don't have that stiffness feeling that we talked about a minute ago. So as far as your posture, when your muscles are more flexible, it allows you to have better posture because your muscles aren't fatigued and stressed out by, just everyday use. They're actually in better shape, better condition, and therefore you're able to actually have correct posture, which means overall you're less sore. And then obviously when you regularly engage in stretching type activities, you actually have a better sense of relaxation overall. And it's because stretching usually is not a high intensity activity that it is something that when you do it, it helps your body can actually relax, which the physical component of that actually affects your mental component. And so it just creates this overall sense of feeling more relaxed. And then obviously when your muscles are in better condition and you have more flexibility, you're just physically in better shape. And if you are participating in any form of exertion, exercise, something like that, you're actually going to do better. You're going to have better performance because of the fact that you've got greater flexibility. So now that we've sort of discussed the benefits and all of that, let's get into the different types of flexibility or stretching, if you will. And there's three main types. You have dynamic, you have static active, and static passive. Static passive is the one that most people are familiar with, but we'll cover that one last, just so that way you can see the comparison of what the other two are. And it's key to note here that dynamic stretching should take place before a workout, and static stretching should follow a workout. And you'll see why this is key in just a second. Dynamic flexibility or kinetic flexibility is when your body's going through a specific range of motion, so that way the joint actually gets full range of motion, but you're not actually holding the position at the end of that motion. It's just fluid movement. So this is becoming more and more common, especially for athletes, because it's a great way to increase things such as the temperature in your muscles, your nervous system activity, and just obviously your general range of motion, which when you're getting ready to exercise, this is important because this will help prevent injury. It's just remembered that you need to have your muscles warmed up before you do any stretching, because if you don't, you can actually injure them. So this means you should do about a 5 to 10 minute warm-up of whatever your activity is. So if you're going to be walking, walk, at a comfortable pace. Don't push it. You're just trying to get blood flow, oxygen moving, all that going around your body. And then you can do some dynamic stretching. And this is... you should be focused on whatever your activity is. So if you're going to be walking, running, something along those lines, do some sort of stretching as far as movement of your legs. If you're going to be playing a sport that involves arm movement like football or baseball or tennis, do movements that involve your upper body as well. And so what this is supposed to be a low level intensity just to get your muscles primed for the activity you're about to do. So you want to gradually increase the speed and intensity as you are doing these activities, so that way when you actually go to do your actual activity after the warm-up, your body's ready for it and you're less likely to get injured. It's not a guarantee you won't get injured, but you're less likely to. So when you get to this whole concept of static flexibility, static active is the use of specific muscles to stretch other muscles. And there are three types of muscles when you're doing this. You have the antagonists, the synergists, and the agonists. And so the agonists create movement and are stabilized by the synergists to stretch the antagonists. So this is a great way to help prevent muscle cramps. So, for example, if you are prone to getting cramping in like your calf area, where you then put your toes up on the wall and then sort of push up like this so you can feel the stretch coming down the back of your calf, that's an example of static active flexibility or stretching. It's because you're using your other muscles, in this case your foot, to stretch your calf. And so that's the key. So this is different than static passive flexibility, which is where you get into a specific position and you have tension on your muscles, but you're holding it in that point where it's sort of a relaxed state. You're not actually doing the full-on deep stretch that you do with the static active. Oftentimes you have people, like in a partner, you help each other with these type of stretches in static passive. So once you get into the position, you basically hold that position, and this is for either type of static flexibility. You hold that position for about 20 to 30 seconds, breathing normally. And the key thing here is to make sure that you have tension, but not pain. You don't want it to be actually hurting. If it's hurting, back off a little bit on, the depth of the stretch or the intensity of the stretch to the point where you can feel the tension, but it's not hurting. And then hold it. If you have a certain problem area, whatever it is, you could be your hamstring, your quad, your calf, your back, whatever it is. Sometimes if you have the area that hurts you more than others or might be tighter than others, then you're going to want to hold it for about 60 seconds or so. So this is why you want to make sure that you're still breathing during this time, because you don't want to hold your breath. That actually creates more tension when you're trying to stretch. And the other key is when you're stretching, don't bounce. That used to be a common practice years ago where you try to sort of up and down motion. This can actually injure your muscles. And so you want to have nice, smooth, slow movement when stretching, so that way that doesn't happen. And obviously, flexibility is something that can be increased over time. You just have to do it regularly. And obviously, the more you exercise, the more stretching you do, better improvement overall. So usually it's recommended you stretch at least 2 to 3 times a week. But sometimes, obviously, if you feel more comfortable and have the time and want to stretch more frequently, that's fine. So this is why when you are doing stretching, you want to make sure you're doing it safely and effectively. And you do this by using the proper technique. So as we discussed before, this is not bouncing. This is concentrating your stretches on specific muscle groups at a time and focusing on that. Making sure you're breathing, making sure that you have tension on your muscles if you're doing static stretching, but not to the point where it's actually hurting and it's painful. So with the dynamic stretching, you want to do that full range of motion at low intensity without going too intense, but make sure you do that after your muscles are already warmed up by doing whatever activity. So if you're going to walk for a little bit, about 5 to 10 minutes, and then do your dynamic stretching. So this is all key as far as making sure you don't get injured when you're trying to stretch. You also have to stretch both sides equally. Obviously, we typically have one side that's more dominant than the other, so this usually gets more use, so it might be more conditioned. But you still need to stretch both sides, so that way you're not causing an imbalance. And it's important to note if you have any chronic conditions that you might need to adjust whatever type of stretching exercises you're doing, just because that way you don't aggravate them. And remember, stretching doesn't prevent an overuse injury. So if you're really exerting yourself, even if you're stretching, you can still get injured. This is why it's important to do the stretching correctly, but also making sure you're doing it frequently, and then being aware of how much you're actually exercising. And if you're doing particular sports, some sports have stretches that are geared towards that based off of what movement you're putting your body through during that. So it can be helpful to research as far as if you're playing baseball, tennis, something along those lines, that you actually do exercises and stretches that will help you during that process so you don't get injured. And then obviously just remember that everyone's unique and that everybody's level of flexibility is different. And you can change that and alter how flexible you are just by doing regular exercise and stretching on a frequent basis. Is that way you can actually increase your flexibility. It's important to note that if you stop doing the stretching exercises, you can actually decrease your muscles' ability. They will go back to being shortened and such, but that's not to say you can't get them back to being more flexible. It just takes time. But otherwise, as far as stretching goes, just maintain a consistent habit with it and you'll see marked improvement, usually in a short period of time. But Thank you guys for joining me today. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you had any questions, comments, please put them in the comment section and I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will see you guys on our next training session next week. Until then, stay healthy.